All right, thank you. And I want to welcome everyone this evening to our Bold New Future Standing Committee meeting. So excited to be with everyone this evening and look forward to the great conversation that we're going to have. Before we get started with things, I do want to remind everyone about the recommitment and feedback survey for Kentucky United We Learn Council members. If you haven't already filled that out, I do encourage you to do so. It is due on Wednesday. And so there are still a few names out that our leadership would like to hear from and be sure that they've made a decision in regard to future plans when it comes to the council as at large. And so I will include that link in the chat, and then also I will include that in an email that will be coming after our meeting. So be on the lookout for that if you have not already filled that out. I want to encourage everyone to remember our why. We are certainly rooted in community collaboration and also in that policy space. And so we will be moving forward with those things in mind. We have a lot of great work ahead of us as a group, and I'm excited to dive into that. I'll go ahead and turn things over to Lillian, and Lillian will be taking roll call for us this evening.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's see, we've got, so Caleb's here. Marcia Carmichael Murphy, Dr. Michelle Chappelle, Heather Dunn.
Here.
Great, welcome Heather. Jim Flynn. Thought I saw Jim on here. I see Jim, so we'll go ahead and mark him present. Audrey.
Yeah, I'm here, sorry.
Oh, there we go. All right, excellent. Welcome, Jim. Audrey Gilbert.
Here.
Brooke Gill. Shelley Hammonds. Jenny Hobson.
Here.
Welcome, Jenny. Jessica Jenkins.
Here.
Welcome, Jessica. Carrie Markham. Justin Mitchell. April Mullins-Dotko. Arivia Park. Julie Pyle.
Present.
Oh, Julie? Yes. No? There you are. I see
Yes.
you. There we
Yes.
go. Sorry, too many screens open. Edna Shack.
Here.
Welcome. Edna. Renee Scott.
Present. Hello.
Hello, Renee. Rose Snell. Whitney Stevenson. And Bentley White.
Present.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll record that for the record. And Caleb, I'll pass back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for helping with that. Very appreciated. So the next item on our agenda has to do with a debrief. And we're going to debrief following our Kentucky Board of Education presentation that happened last week. And so we had a great time. We were very thankful for the opportunity. I was very thankful for the opportunity to discuss not only Bold New Future work, but also the work of the council at large, and specifically around some of the work that we've done with Portrait of a Learner and engaging with it. So I do have a few key takeaways that I would like to share with you all from our experience and from the experience that I had. The board was very receptive to the info that we shared, and to very receptive when it comes to conversing about Portrait of a Learner and learning more about Portrait of a Learner. And so they're especially interested in learning about how this will look differently for students across the state, and also what will it look like for schools as they integrate and as they implement Portrait of a Learner. And so my biggest takeaways really come from we partook in an activity, which we will discuss in just a moment. We allowed the board members to take part in that activity. Really appreciated their insight that they provided. I will invite Dr. Tammy Schiff if she has any comments to add there, and we'll continue on moving forward with our conversation here after she provides some insight as well.
Okay, Caleb, I thought you were going to walk through some of that. So just, it was in, I believe, some of the pieces that Caleb shared with you, but actually, I don't know if the World Cafe activity was in your pieces. So let me see if I can just quickly share my screen. It wasn't, was it? You all haven't, I know Julie has seen it, but otherwise, no, I think. Let's see. Uh-oh, I don't have the ability to share screen, I guess. Uh-oh. Interesting.
How do I change that?
I don't know.
Let me make you a co-host. Let's
I
try.
think host, yeah.
All right,
There you go.
now give it a try.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go to this one. And y'all tell me if you can see this World Cafe activity. Somebody give me a thumbs up. There's only a few of you now on the screen. Great. So what we did was we did the three-part, I think y'all remember from 2 meetings ago, I guess, when we talked about the sandwich presentation, and that the first part of the presentation was going to be a download of information that was gathered by a survey that went out jointly between the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support and the Communications Office, 2 districts that were fairly far or midpoint along their continuum of implementation of Portrait of a Learner. And that survey asked for district leaders to fill that out based on and to provide feedback on where they were on the continuum, what challenges and issues they might be running into, what supports, importantly, they felt that they needed from the agency to move forward and more fully implement their Portrait of a Learner activities, and also to provide us with some examples of Portrait of a Learner coming to life in either their classrooms or for students. So that was part 1 of the presentation. The middle part was Caleb providing the presentation on behalf of the Bold New Futures Standing Committee, which you all received in the email, I think, yesterday, right? And hopefully I won't freeze, but I see that I did already. Thank you. Here we go. Sorry about that. That's terrible looking. Uh-oh. What's going on here? Too many screens open. So anyway, you can hear me, right? Edna, shake your head. You're actually on my screen. Thanks. There's only a few of you. All right. So anyway, so sorry about the frozen face. So then Caleb did the Bold New Futures presentation, which I think was very well received as the first experience of one of our standing committees activating on their sort of near-term goal. And in our case, it was, I teed it up, if you listen to any part of the actual presentation, that this was our first foray into reaching out to our community and stakeholders, trying to identify and gather feedback. And this was sort of the first digest of that, and that we're going to continue path. And then we wrapped up part 3 of the presentation was for the board to get up and move around to 3 tables in a what's called a World Cafe methodology. And they were posed with these 3 questions that you see on your screen. And then they moved as groups of about 5 or 6 to each of the tables and provided feedback. So first off, what was their ahas? What did they see as the benefits, challenges, watchouts, burning questions based on the other, the 2 previous presentations? And then thinking about the 4 habits that we've talked a lot about and that are part of the foundational elements of the Cool Council: co-creation, reciprocity, inclusion, and empathy. Which ones do they feel that the board in particularly needs to lean into in terms of those habits, and why, and how that was all put in their thought process? And then very importantly, and sorry, this is what you're seeing with the 3 number 1s is actually a draft was fixed for the presentation, and I just saw that I pulled up the wrong PowerPoint. But anyway, the third question was about the timeline or the runway. If they were to consider changing graduation requirements, what supports might be needed for the districts, for teachers, for students, for families? And this question I will share back with you when I wrote it. I was very much thinking about what we heard at our last BNF meeting in terms of some of the commentary about, well, maybe some things need to be taken off of teachers' plates, or teachers and students are already doing so many things. How are they going to fit this in, and those sorts of things. And we wanted to see how the board might feedback along those lines. So they did the walkthrough for about 40 minutes. About 7 to 9 minutes at each table, and then they provided an output to the board as a group. And fortunately, Julie's on this call, and she did the output for one of the table groups. Alyssa, one of the newer board members who's a teacher, provided one, and what is now Vice Chair Young provided output from those their group tables. So very quickly, and I wish I wasn't frozen.
And I don't mind to. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to stop sharing and free it up for a second. So let me just, because I went back, and hopefully you can hear me. Yes, somebody say yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Because something weird is going on, you just white it out. Anyway, so I went back and re-listened to that feedback and took some quick notes. So I'll share that with you. So Alyssa, very interesting. She's from Christian County, and she was very excited because she was actually later that week, I believe, going to be doing PD for Portrait of a Learner in her county. And she thought that what we were talking about in terms of the input from the two presentations and Portrait of a Learner was very much what students need. They want to also, in her county, make it very easy for teachers to implement. Can you hear me? Now I'm getting weird.
Yes.
Okay. If I flame out, you know what? I'm going to just turn on my phone really quick. Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
Well, you're okay, and I don't mind to.
Okay, let me just, because I've got some quick notes on this. Let me hopefully just keep telling me you can hear me.
Yeah. I don't mind to continue there, sort of where Dr. Schiff left off, and allow her to add thoughts, later on. Alyssa focused very extensively on how teachers might go about working with Portrait of a Learner and implementing it, and how there is a real need to ensure that teachers are included in the process when it comes to developing implementation guides and things of that sort for Portrait of a Learner, bringing her rural perspective to the table. And I know that I greatly appreciated that as she shared her thoughts, and we'll provide Dr. Schiff an opportunity to return to that thought if need be. I noticed that our Vice Chair Young focused significantly on how there's this concept of an Archimedean lever, and essentially alluding to the lever that was created many years ago, and how it allowed for movement upward of items, and how she's long said that Portrait of a Learner is an Archimedean lever, but actually had focused more so on assessment and accountability, and how Portrait of a Learner might be able to support existing assessments and so forth, while also allowing for a more competency-based education system. And so I definitely took notes there when it comes to thinking about the ways that we assess students and how that might look differently with Portrait of a Learner, and also how some of what we're doing might already be tied to the concept of Portrait of a Learner. And so I think it's neat for us to think about that, both the present and then also what we're working toward in the future. It allows us to stay grounded in what we're doing as a group. And then I am going to point to our one of our newest members now, and we'll mention her thoughts. Julie Powell is a member of our standing committee and is also a member of the Board of Education now. It was great to see her not only representing the stakeholder groups she represents, but also in part representing our work that we've done as a group. So very grateful to have her perspective on the board. I noticed that Julie focused quite a bit on in representing the group that she was part of, focused quite a bit on storytelling. And so the importance of using stories to highlight exactly what this work is and what it means for Kentucky. Really appreciated the emphasis there, because I think that our data, or I don't want to say our data, the information that we've gathered rather, has allowed us to see that there are a lot of uncertainties when it comes to Portrait of a Learner and other concepts that relate to it. And so it's certainly important that we explain exactly what it is, and then also that we're highlighting its positive attributes. And so those are the keynotes that I took from re-listening to the presentation and listening into those insights again. Truthfully, as a member of this committee, to hear the board engaging with the task that we put before them, the activity that we asked them to engage in, it meant a lot. And it really shows that, you know, they want to hear from us as stakeholders, and that means a lot to me. And so as we move forward in today's meeting, we will actually talk soon about what exactly that'll look like. Has Dr. Schiff been able to rejoin? Is that? I just wanted to be sure that if she had additional thoughts to share.
She is not back yet.
Okay, all right. I know she mentioned that she had planned to join on her phone, so hopefully she'll be able to do that here soon.
Oh, Caleb here. She just joined the waiting room.
Okay.
I'm letting her in now.
All right, wonderful. And I'll recap basically what I had said for her, so she'll know.
So
All
sorry.
right. No, you're
Hi.
fine.
Don't know when I
have-
lost you. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I just wanted to tell you that I had updated on, I'd provided a reflection briefly on Vice Chair Young's comments, and then also on Julie's comments.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you'd like
That's where I
to,
left off.
anything you'd like to add from Alyssa's comments.
From Alyssa's. Did you not hear me at all in any of
We
them?
did. Yeah, we
Okay.
did. Just want to be sure you were able to cover everything. Didn't want to leave
I
you.
think so. Well, I covered Luz. I'm so sorry. It didn't show that it had disconnected. Sorry about that. I thought we were on the whole time. No, all I did was at the end, sorry about that, toss to Julie if she had any additional thoughts or comments based on her digest.
Yeah, it was a fantastic activity, and all the board members were very, very engaged. I would love to see a share out of what we wrote on the papers, because there was a lot of thoughts put into it. But I think Caleb really highlighted that there was a lot of conversation around storytelling, and being on the forefront and being proactive about really what Portrait of a Learner is and what the vision of it is for the state. But there was also a lot of thinking about pausing, because we have schools and districts at different places in the continuum of Portrait of a Learner. Some haven't even started, and then there's some that are like Fleming and what was the other county that was there? Hardin County, I think, that did presentations, that in Shelby County. So there's some of them that are like way really advanced, and then there's some that is not even thought of as a point of conversation in communities. And so we have to be really cognizant of that whole continuum, because they're all along the spectrum.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree, and I think that, you know, we recalling that portion of conversation, I'm reminded of the need for us to think about that continuum and how, as we pause, also, you know, how we're going to support some of those districts, and maybe use storytelling as a mechanism for encouraging districts to take part. And one thing that I believe Alyssa had mentioned, it stood out to me now that I'm thinking about it. She had mentioned that in order to have buy-in from districts, there has to be that community element of designing and crafting and so forth. And so I think that that's a neat thought to pair with yours, Julie, when it comes to that. I really appreciated that emphasis on, I believe the term was by us, or for us, with us. And so thinking about how those different groups can be included, teachers, students, parents, community members, industry partners, and so forth, is very, very important moving forward.
Yeah, I think it was, and I ended with that, sorry about that, but it was don't do something for me without me.
Okay. Yes.
And
Powerful.
Vice Chair Young, it resonated with her as well. And I think importantly for Chair Robinson, this is all new lingo. We were all tripping over ourselves as to who was in what seat at the beginning of the meeting. But she mentioned that recognizing that right now we're running with the early adopters when it comes to Portrait of a Learner, and we need to be sure that we hear from and know and include all the others. And that seemed to resonate very well. That, I think that's really important, especially when you're thinking about change management, that you, just because we might be drinking the Kool-Aid doesn't mean that everybody else is. And I think some of that feedback is also what we heard even in our 23 that were spoken to in the first part of the task, is that we may have touched some nerves with folks who weren't, in the early adopter category. And so Chair Robinson mentioned, we need to, from the board perspective, is how do we include others, and that those are some of the challenges ahead.
And Caleb, I don't know if you can see the chat here, but Jim just put a comment in talking about how we need to think about how this particular issue is nested in the broader policy environment, that for those, if we don't shift the policy system's focus on other outcomes, that many will be reluctant to move in that direction. So just wanted to bring that comment forward.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Flynn, for sharing. I really appreciate that, and appreciate the perspective that you bring as a former superintendent who now works with superintendents across the state. So thank you for that, and certainly reminds me of some of the conversations that we've had in the past about how we have to be sure that with this work, we will almost sort of balance things out, right, and ensure that that folks are incentivized to take part. And so, absolutely. So, if I want to first of all just ask if there are any additional thoughts before we maybe consider moving forward, or does anyone have any additional thoughts they might like to add, or any questions or anything like that?
I thought that I was so glad to have the opportunity to view the presentation. And I was thinking, when I was listening and hearing about the early adopters and thinking about how, the comment about don't do anything for me without me, I was thinking that we really need to think about a good marketing campaign so that we can try to make sure that it's on the tongue of everybody. And I'm trying to think of a slogan like, Nike's slogan, or somebody, you think about something so that when everybody hears Portrait of a Learner, they think of those words. So it becomes like a natural part of the conversation, because it's not right now. And even though we have early adopters, there's so few, because when they talked about the survey information, there were only two districts, Logan and Shelby, that even had addressed attempting putting some type of policy implication in their graduation requirements. And I think that we might think about a podcast. When you talk about storytelling, how can we incorporate social media and YouTube, the things that our families, our students, our communities are looking at? How can we bring our conversation and our campaign and this Portrait of a Learner to people in a way that they are comfortable with it, like YouTube, like social media, like podcasts? And storytelling and podcasts might go very well together, because I really appreciated the video that preceded the presentation that had our Teacher of the Year and Vice Chair Young in it talking about the new direction. And the teacher mentioned that when she thinks of Portrait of a Learner, she thinks it's a way to look at developing critical thinkers for the state of Kentucky. And since critical thinking, when we talk about assessment and accountability, people, can go both ways. But when you talk about, what does it mean to be a critical thinker? I think that's a much more positive spin. At least I think so. That's it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Renee. Very appreciated. And I will say that I do really find value in those communicative efforts that you've mentioned. Social media being one of those for sure. And I do think the video allows quite a bit of opportunity for getting the word out. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to share that video and make use of it as a resource for telling about Portrait of a Learner. And your thoughts reminded me of previous conversations that I've had about how sometimes, if something is moved along, it's important to ensure that you're meeting people where they are in that moment, rather than asking folks to kind of catch up later on. And so I certainly think that right now we're at a good point to consider some of those communicative efforts that we're talking about, and how we might communicate with districts and schools, but also community members and parents and those students and so forth. And so I think that this is a really great segue, Renee, into our next agenda item and our next topic of conversation. And so if we're ready to move on, we'll go ahead and we will do that. And our next agenda item is actually going to be focused on our 6-month goal. We're going to have a discussion about potential next steps, and then also not just with our 6-month goal, but also thinking about some of the work that we've done with data collection and how that might look moving forward. So I will invite Lillian Pace to join the conversation here, and we will go ahead and get started talking about our next steps. And so I do want to recap and just say that in April of 2023, we made a goal to collect data from every district. This was our 6-month goal, by the way, to collect data from every district to understand the value of skills similar to those on Kentucky's Portrait of a Learner, and identify learnings to inform improvements to the state's graduation requirements. And so in June, if you remember, we sent out an initial data collection test. In August, of course, we presented to the Board of Education just recently here. And then now we are going to move forward with a second data collection task. And so that is something that we will be discussing some tonight and going over as a group. So Lillian, if you have any thoughts you'd like to add before we kind of get started thinking about some possible changes we might make, or some possible improvements rather we might make to the initial task, I'll turn things over to you.
Great, thank you, Caleb. As you were talking, I started sharing my screen, which is the document that I also put the link in the chat to. This is sort of the first page of that. First restates that 6-month goal that Caleb reminded us about, that we've been working on since the April convening, and then a timeline that Caleb shared. So if we think about our work since that April meeting, focusing on that initial data collection, as Caleb shared, we have an incredible opportunity still before us as a result of how well received the presentation was at the Kentucky Board of Education meeting just this past week, to engage in more data collection. I think there was sort of this feeling, as you heard, that data was really helpful. It signaled some early themes that would help those board members begin to think differently or more deeply about what a potential policy change might look like, what some of the impacts might be, how we get ready for something like that. And they want to see more of that. They want more data collected. And this is the perfect committee to do that, because this committee is focused on the community engagement work, particularly in service of informing policy change. So what we sort of thought would be a useful focus for maybe the next, 20, 30 minutes here is to discuss with this group how we might improve upon that existing data collection task that went out into the field to collect that survey data in June, so that all of us here on this committee would have the opportunity to put that back out into the field again and hopefully collect more responses so that we have not only sort of a broad demographic, but also geographic spread and also role diversity spread. There were some areas in the initial survey collection that were particularly low from participation. So for example, students, parents, how do we get to these particular groups? So wanted to have a conversation about that. Our thinking was that after conducting that data collection, that it could be very valuable for this committee at our September meeting to come back together and review that data and then begin to prepare a memo for those Kentucky Board of Education members so that they can review that memo ahead of an October meeting. And they're meeting October 1st and 2nd, and that would be the time that they might consider an actual policy action as it relates to the graduation requirement proposal. So wanted to kind of preview that timeline briefly and just pause there and see if there's any clarifying questions or feedback from members about engaging in that type of a process before we then go into a discussion about how we might refine the task and then how we might use our networks to reach as many respondents as possible.
One thing I do want to add, just before we turn things over very, very briefly, I want to be sure that we are cognizant of the fact that this initial task was certainly insightful. And so we want to be sure moving forward that we are honoring it and it's the work that we put into it. And as we think about some ways that we might improve in the future. So we want to be sure that we are working to collect the same type of data. I just want to be sure that we threw that out there. I had not had the opportunity to say that previously. I apologize. So I'll go ahead and turn things over.
Great. I see Jim has his hand raised. You want to jump in, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everyone. I appreciate all the comments so far. And kind of to follow up on my statement about kind of moving from aspirational to operational. I think one of the things that I've seen educators struggle with in this, and others for that matter, is they get stuck in it being just kind of an aspirational thing. So, like, what does it really mean in practice in our schools and classrooms? And I really do think if we could think about a framework or a model, blueprint that would give them at least some idea of how you can operationalize, the portrait of a learner, aspirational, aspects to it. So I guess I just want to throw that out because I was really reflecting on, kind of some of the pushback. And then I started thinking about my own experience when we did a profile of graduate work. And we tried to build a framework for next grade readiness at every single grade level around our portrait of a graduate aspirations, along with other academic and non-academic metrics that were important to us in the work. And that kind of helped start building a way for them to say, okay, well, that's what it can look like for a kindergarten student or a first grader or a 10th grader. So I just want to throw that out there because I really do think a lot of people will get stuck in the aspiration side and not see how you can move it to operational.
Thanks, Jim. That's really, really good feedback, and also reminded me that one of the other important and related piece of information to share is because of some of the data collected by this group, you know, there sort of was a healthy dialogue around like some of these implementation considerations, like how do we prepare districts? What really is the on-ramp, right, to be able to do this work in a way that feels manageable, that everyone can sort of visualize a path forward. And so one of the considerations at this moment is, you know, do we want to think about delaying the implementation timeline a little bit to provide more time to do some of potentially the activities that you discussed there? So I think like the appetite is very strong right now to try to figure out how to do this. You know, if the board were to proceed in this direction, what are the strategies that need to be put in place in order to ensure that, you know, communities can visualize a path forward, that they understand how to do implementation well, that they have the capacity to do that work well as well. Sorry, work well as well. Any other just clarifying questions on this timeline? And then I think we're going to jump into some dialogue around how to refine and improve the task to a place that everybody would feel comfortable deploying that into their networks. Okay, so seeing none, I'm going to move to the second page of the document here, and Caleb was going to take us through a couple discussion questions. The first one being around how we might strengthen the data collection task. And so obviously for those who had a chance to pilot it with you know, one or two people in your network, you might have learned some things about what worked well, what didn't. Some of the, you know, initial feedback was pretty apparent in the data around, you know, some of the participants weren't familiar with things like the portrait of a learner, or I'm sorry, profile of a learner. What is that, right? And a lot of concerns around this notion of portfolios, right? And some of the issues and perception of that in the past. So we did get some feedback, and we have some ideas of some of the things we might want to improve, but wanted to pass to Caleb to lead us through a discussion on areas we might want to strengthen before we take that back out into our networks.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do think that, you know, in thinking about the data we collected, certainly it serves as a great pulse check, and it allows us to get a feel for some of the things that are happening in the field, but certainly it is not an exhaustive representation of the field and the entire landscape for policy development and such around portrait of a learner. And so we know that there are a lot of perspectives that we're missing. We know that that's especially true when it comes to, well, I apologize. We're not sure when that comes to things such as geographics, and so or different minority groups and so forth, and their experiences with portrait of a learner. And so we want to be sure moving forward that we are responsive to the needs of all our stakeholders. And so through that, there are some ideas here, as you can see on the screen in this document, but other ways too that you all might be thinking about, and would invite you to share here in just a moment. And so it's important for us to think about how we can strengthen our data collection task and grow the insights that it provides us. And so that is my ask for you. So of course, potential examples include things such as providing background on portrait of a learner, or clarifying that portfolios, as we've known them, and as I actually knew them growing up as a student in Kentucky, that they're not the same as that portraits are not the same as Kentucky's past history with different portfolios, especially among the primary grades. And then also thinking about, you know, might we include an ask pertaining to geographical distribution of the respondents? And would it be helpful to include a committee member name, the person who conducted the survey? And so lots of thoughts there, lots of possible avenues to move forward when it comes to strengthening our task. I would invite anyone to share any insights they might have or any thoughts they might have on how we can improve. Thinking specifically about, you know, how we can broaden the ideas we're able to, the themes and the ideas we're able to gather and collect with the data. So I'm going to go ahead and invite you all to provide any insight that you might have. Yes.
There's some great comments already populating in the chat. I don't know, Edna, if you want to speak to your suggestion first.
Yeah, I'm actually sitting here trying to reword it because when I read what you wrote, is exactly what I wrote, and that's not what I mean, it's kind of what I meant, but it's I guess you could ask it that way. How long do you think it would take your district to reasonably implement, or in what year do you think your district would be able to make it a graduation requirement? That is related to the fact that we have been talking mostly with districts that have already implemented, and we need to get feedback from those that are kind of just getting wind of this and thinking, oh my gosh. So it might be helpful, and that may not be the first question to ask. It would be a later question.
That's great. Julie, it looks like you have your hand up. Do you want to respond or jump in with another thought there? I know you got some good ones in the chat as well.
I was just going to share. So prior to going to the meeting last week, I spoke with our high school principal for my kids' high school, which is probably the most diverse high school in our district, and also has the highest socioeconomic numbers. But what I found interesting from her was, so I asked her, I said, do you thinking, 4 or 5 years, if you start with the next incoming freshman class or whatever, is that doable? Can you implement and do this? And she said, yes, we're right there at that point, that what we really need is somebody from outside saying, you need to do this, like here's a deadline, because then that's that final push emphasis that they would have with their staff saying, you don't have a choice on this anymore. Let's finish this and get this done. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. It was not at all what I expected to hear from her.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I think I went to unmute myself and might have accidentally muted you. I did not mean to do that. Thank you for that.
I'm gonna say, Lillian, I noticed a couple of hands here raised right now. So if we'd like to invite Dr. Flynn to, if he has any thoughts to share, to join.
I hadn't put my hand down, Caleb, but
Okay.
I will
All right.
mention from my Susan posted a document to a KDE guidance document for Portrait of a Learner. It has some really great examples that we could use as a companion to the portrait when we're getting feedback. Obviously, we wouldn't want to use the entire document. That'd be a little intimidating to those that we're trying to get input from, but there are some really good examples in there. And that could be at least a start of giving them some kind of real clear idea of what implementation could look like.
Great, absolutely. I noticed that Jessica has her hand raised, so I'll invite Jessica to share.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to quickly share like 3 things. One, I did a lot of graduate research in critical thinking. And one of the things we found out that teachers and principals and really anybody, they want to stay away from critical thinking because it's scary. So they kind of look at critical thinking as being under science, and science is like this huge just concept that a lot of them don't really have down. And so part of my work was to basically be like, hey, so this is what critical thinking is. And I know the PLL really works a lot on that. And so maybe some of these districts really just need help with kind of thinking, oh, hey, like this is what PLL is. This is what critical thinking is. And that might kind of help get their ball rolling a little bit. And I was thinking about what Julie said. And as a teacher, we kind of joked about that a lot. We would say, if the district says you should do it, but they don't make you do it, we're not doing it. Like, we have too much to do already. But if you say by this date, you have to have this, this, and this, it really gets us going. And we're like, okay, now we have to do this. And I think that making that timeline like more condensed will kind of get that ball rolling a little faster. And the last thing, sorry, that Bentley was saying, I totally agree with. Having that POL start from elementary instead of making it like that grad requirement, it is a really good idea, because if you just say, hey, it's a grad requirement, then they're just going to do it when you're a senior. That's it. But in reality, this critical thinking concepts, it really needs to start when they're little, and they kind of need to be working on that. And I know some schools are doing that, like Berea Community I know does, but a lot of schools will need help with that. So that's just that's all.
Yeah, and I was going to point to the chat. I appreciate that, Jessica, and your emphasis there on that idea of it being across the grade levels within a school or within a district. I really appreciate you mentioning that. I'm looking here through the chat right now, and Bentley, would you like to share your thought or expand on it any at all?
Sure. So I was thinking more of, this is gonna sound weird. Well, not really weird, but different. But it's not entirely what I'm thinking either, but it's the best example that I can think of given this situation, if that makes sense. Almost like a Montessori approach, but P through 12. But you have to understand that the Montessori system cannot be fully applicable in a public education setting. It's just not going to work. So it's trying to tie in the Montessori system with the traditional K through 12 system and making this approach that is like teaching these critical thinking skills and portrait of a learner and stuff like that from the moment that you enter the school system. Because when you have it as simply a graduation requirement, that makes it to where all throughout primary school, it's just like the same old. And then once you get to secondary school, it's more, okay, you're graduating soon. We got to start filling out all these graduation requirements. So let's just go ahead and start changing the way we're doing it now. So sorry, I'm trying to read these comments. Well, I get that, Julie, that nothing should be off the table, but sometimes it's just a logistical, and I'm trying to be a pragmatist here, if that makes sense. Like, it's just, you have to look at it from the whole perspective of the whole situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you you sharing your thoughts there, Bentley, and it's reminded me of a conversation that I had with my aunt recently. She's a preschool teacher, and so she teaches very small children. And I think a lot of people would say maybe that during that preschool year, students are really learning, how to go to school, sort of, right, and they're developing some of that foundational understanding that will guide them as they prepare for kindergarten. But yesterday during our conversation, we were talking about how so much of the content that she's teaching is embedded within the daily activities that her students partake in. And so not only are they learning such things as, it's time to line up, or it's time to change stations, or it's time to, but they're learning how to spell their name when they're looking for their name in different places. They're learning. So I really see some value in that, and thinking about how we can implement those opportunities for learning, especially at that younger level, in the daily activities that students partake in, and how we can embed curriculum within the movement of a day. Whereas it does not have to be, explicit sit down and listen type of instruction, that it can happen on the move. It can happen in ways that are outside of what we think of when we think of traditional instruction. So I think there's real power in that, and I kind of can see how your idea with using that Montessori approach of thinking about, the involving activities rather than those formal teaching opportunities. I can see how it ties together. And I know we have a preschool teacher or a preschool leader, Whitney, here with us. And so, Whitney, if you'd like to expand at all on that, would love to invite you to do so.
Absolutely. I think everything that you said is that the premise of what preschool is. It's embedding it because children are working on skills every day. It just looks different, and that's okay. And that's what it's supposed to. It's supposed to be developmentally and age appropriate for preschool students. But I think, what you said is exactly true, how we can, take this and, ensure that even our youngest learners are benefiting from this work and what we're talking about, and making sure that it's developmentally and age appropriate for them.
I noticed that. Thank you, Whitney, for sharing. I noticed that we have a couple of hands raised here, so I'd like to invite Dr. Flynn to share, and then Dr. Shack after Dr. Flynn shares.
Thanks, appreciate it, Caleb. We had talked at our previous meeting about the need for a more comprehensive policy approach to this. The connotation of graduation requirements makes people think it's just at the high school, and we're touching on it needs to be preschool through 12th grade, and that our preschoolers can start working on those skills and dispositional qualities to become the best version of themselves all the way to the end. So did you all discuss that at the KBE meeting? I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Did y'all lose me?
I'm sorry, I might have missed out on the last part that you had said. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to know if there was any discussion of that at the KBE retreat last week, because I know that was one thing that came up at our previous meeting in terms of thinking about how do we really give this the best chance forward, and get more districts on board. And again, one of the concerns I have is that we just kind of focus on, POL and high school graduation. It will have a connotation that it's just a high school thing, and not, as Julie described, a deeper learning P12 initiative for all kids in the school district.
Right. No, I definitely do think that there was a hint at that. I can't recall a specific mention of that concept. Well, I know that I've heard different districts across the state talking about that and thinking about how they can, move forward in a way that will include POL or the idea of a defensive learning or something like that at the elementary and then also at the middle and high levels. So allowing for that to kind of start around the 5th grade level, I think is what I've heard mentioned previously. And I don't want to quote a specific district on that because I can't, but I will say that I do know that in the field there are those conversations. So certainly value the input there.
Well, I just want to mention, just for the record, I think we need to be very intentional about that, not hint around the edges. That's just my opinion, but I just want to make that clear for the record. I think otherwise, we'll continue to have areas where I think it'll be harder to get it to move. But I saw where Lillian posted some update coming on the policy side of that equation, and maybe there's starting to be some development of strategy around that. But I think this group, if you all agree. We just need to be real intentional and vocal about that's how we're going to get this to move, along with operationalizing from just aspirational.
Yeah. No, and I think what we're hearing in the field parallels that around, making sure that it's not tied just to the high school level and that it is across the continuum. So I appreciate that. I am curious to hear from our members about thoughts when it comes to how we might be able to maximize our data collection. So thinking about, do we want to make individual commitments to interview people in our networks? How might we, get the task here in front of larger networks? Also, who has specific contacts to networks of students and families? I know we have folks involved with our work who are very closely tied to the Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence and the work that they do when it comes to family engagement. So, of course, I'm looking to those folks and also to our folks who are leading organizations such as you, Dr. Flynn, and so forth. And then also, how might we be able to leverage the at-large council work that's going on around our group? So does anyone have any thoughts they'd like to add when it comes to maximizing that data collection? Going to check the chat here and then also to see if we have any. Let's see. Yeah. So I know that I ran through a few questions there pretty quickly, but I will ask, do you think that, and this is speaking to the whole group, and so I want to reiterate that this is going to be a whole group effort. I appreciate that, Dr. Flynn. Your comment in the chat says, I'll get a strong sample of school superintendents. Thank you for that. Very appreciative. I'm curious to know, though, would everyone like to commit to a certain number of tasks, of responses that we might be able to talk with people? And do we want to commit to a certain number? What are our thoughts there as a group?
Caleb, can you
I
remind me
think-
of? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you
No, go
remind me
ahead.
of how we gathered the data again?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah, in the email that I sent you, you'll find the link to this form to fill out. It's a Google form, and essentially you'll sit down with said. You mentioned superintendent, and so you'll sit down with said superintendent, and you'll ask these questions in sort of an interview style. That was the original goal, and that'll kind of be the goal moving forward. Allow for that personal connection and that conversation. And you'll fill it out as they kind of express their thoughts. So
that's what I thought. So
Yeah,
it's a little more labor intensive, but you're actually talking directly to a
right.
person.
Yes, you are. Yes,
Now,
that is the goal.
Do you suggest it be more like one-on-one, or could you do like a focus group format using the tool?
I hadn't thought too extensively about that for the initial round. I would imagine, I would say probably that it would be best to do individuals, because that way we can collect that sort of geographical data and maybe some of that other data that we might be looking for in terms of minority status and so forth. But I think that's something for us to explore. I know that Dr. Shack has said in the chat that we need to review the survey. And I definitely think we'll have an opportunity to do that in the near future. And then another note to add, Julie has mentioned maybe linking to the new POL video at the top of the survey. So maybe even embedding. I vote that as a group, tonight we have it appears as though we have right around 15 or so. I want to say 16. Let's see here. I'm just counting to be sure. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Hey, Caleb, while you're counting, do you think we could pull out maybe a little sampling of what the POL might look like in practice that's from that guidance document? We don't need the whole document, but maybe just a little link to what this might look like, so that they could just glance at something to say, oh, okay, from this aspirational idea of a POL to practice in classrooms. That I think that could be helpful, especially those that will think of it. It's just one more thing that we got to do. And that was another thing we talked about at the last one. If we're going to add this, is there anything we're going to take away from our teachers? But our teachers are feeling so overwhelmed right now with everything they're being asked to do, and we're terrible at weeding the garden.
Okay. Yeah. So if you'd like to make note, Lillian, just thinking about how we might be able to include examples from existing KDE document guidance. So there's a thought to add there. I'm curious to know, would anyone be opposed to saying that we set a goal of 5 per member? I noticed we might have a hand. Dr. Shack's hand is raised. I invite Dr. Shack to contribute. Okay, 5 sounds doable.
Hand still raised.
Five sounds great. Okay.
And just to clarify or remind folks on the timeline. So I think the hope was that we could get the task kind of cleaned up, address some of these great suggestions about how to improve that task, and have it ready to go within a week. So you have essentially 3 weeks in August to collect those interviews. I know that's not the greatest time of the year, but we do have to work with what we have from the state board's timeline. And so that would enable us to get the data back by September 1st, so that when we meet on September 5th, we have a synthesis of that data ready for everybody to review.
So I think we've come to an agreement on 5. That sounds good. So we will, and I want our group to know, to rest assured that you will receive an email with this information, and then also a link to the form, as well as and we will be sure. Dr. Shack has mentioned putting the date in the notes, Lillian. That way, when we send the email, we'll have that due date sort of in the mention, so that we can be cognizant of that moving forward. I do think that we have a pretty good idea then, if we're planning to do the 5, and I also think that here in our notes that Lillian has collected, we have a pretty good idea as to how we might move forward and think about the different ways that we can maximize our data collection. So if there are no other comments pertaining to it, I will invite John to talk with us about the policy work group and provide us an update when it comes to the work the policy work group is doing. Dr. Shack, do you have your hand raised? I apologize.
I do.
Okay, no, yeah, we'd love to open the floor for you.
Okay. Well, all of the talk we had just a few minutes ago about this is not something that just happens at the end. And I'm not sure. There's one good question in the survey that somewhat captures it, and that is, did you do anything in your schooling that would have contributed to the PO? I don't know the wording exactly, but it kind of gets at the learning experiences. And I think that's what we're all kind of hopping around those learning experiences, and yet we're asking about the portrait of a learner. And then when you take Jim's comments about how do we phase policy in early on, or phase it in beginning early, are we talking policy only about like a POL kind of activity at different grade levels, or are we talking about policy in terms of learning experiences? And then my other question is, maybe Vibrant Learning Experiences is doing this work. So how do we intersect with them? Or have they done any surveying of schools? Do we have any sense of how many districts in the state are already doing deeper learning, are already involved in project-based learning, are in the Innovative Learning Network? Because they've started the work of what it means to lay the foundation for the portrait of a learner. And how do we tie that into our survey?
Edna, you actually, if I can jump in here for a second, that committee is they are surveying and trying to get a read on how many districts are, and actually through KDE's Office of Innovation, there's also data collection happening there. So we do have more information than we ever have before, which is great. But you're raising a really good point about whether it might be valuable to engage the other cool standing committees in survey collection as well. So I'm curious, like, what your thought might be about that. Do we want to also recruit those committees to go do their own data collection? Because particularly for those serving on the VLE committee, they're going to be deeply entrenched in districts doing this work already. So they could have really good perspectives that we'd want to include.
Well, I guess my big concern would be the effect of all three subcommittees doing their own surveys. Will we be confusing people as to what the heck's going on? Whereas if we had a common survey that tied all those things together, I don't want it to get too long, but having more of an umbrella view of how all these things work together. I think that's why school districts and teachers are worried, because they're hearing about all these things, they're already doing, and now we're going to do one more thing. But if we could help them see that they all tie together, and doing it all in one survey might be a way to do that.
Yeah. It's a great suggestion. I've got that in the notes. Thank you for that. All right, John, I think the floor is yours.
Great. Just wanted to make sure before I jumped in on anything. So I thought it might be easier to have a little slide deck for folks to take a look at here. So just confirming you see my goals up on the screen, right? Yeah. So as a quick refresher for folks, back in the April Cool Council convening, we took a vote as a full committee and elected to create a policy working group. The goal of the policy working group would be to take the direction of the BNF committee and craft specific policy proposals, then refine those proposals through collaboration with experts, really getting into the nuts and bolts of how we might operationalize some of the policy pieces that we considered. We had gone through an exercise where folks had opted to come over and work in the policy side of things, essentially took a number of the recommendations from the opportunity analysis and then went through, sorted them, added to them, modified them as needed, and then came up with a set of about 8 different recommendations that they really wanted this working group to really dig into. So this working group over the next couple of months is really going to be digging into those pieces and then creating some specific proposals that can be raised up to the full BNF committee for consideration to possibly send to the Cool Council for October. So just as a quick FYI, here's the general list of who we have as participants to date. We have Knowledge Works staff, being both Lillian and myself, providing a lot of the technical and organizational support for this work. There's a number of folks from the Kentucky Department of Education, including our own Meredith Brewer, but also a number of folks from other relevant offices relevant to the specific areas that folks elected to work on. There are a few folks that are volunteering from the BNF committee to participate. Currently, we've reached out to a number of other stakeholders across the state. We have confirmed that the Kentucky Student Voice team is going to be also participating, and we're still working with a couple other folks to finalize that participation. But we have about currently 12 or so folks, and hopefully we'll add a few more before we kick things off. And that first meeting is going to be next Monday. So essentially, the way that we're thinking about approaching this is digging into, and you can see up here on the screen, the different categories of August, really digging into some of those things that are potentially a little bit opportunities for quicker wins, thinking about some of those requests like, is there opportunity for funding for folks to do planning and visits to schools around the state? There was a strong preference recommended for looking at how do we create a stronger P20 vision alignment across Kentucky with things like the Portrait of a Learner and also the Council on Post-Secondary Education's equivalent document. And then thinking about how do we really evaluate the impact of this work in competency-based education and then spread the information about what's working and how to move things forward. So really trying to dig into those first three issues in this first meeting, and then in September and onward, dig into the rest of them kind of depending on the time frame. So the way that we're kind of envisioning this will generally go is we'll have some conversations about what are the specific details about how might we go about doing these things in each of these situations. Who is the appropriate actor? In that case, maybe it is the state legislature, maybe it's Kentucky's Department of Ed, maybe there's a different actor that would be the right person or right entity to work on it. What's the best way to go about doing it? Is it through legislation? Is it through Kentucky guidance? Is it some kind of internal process by which Kentucky's Department of Ed could take certain actions? And then is there a need for maybe more expertise as we dig into this? So for next steps, as I mentioned, we're meeting next Monday. The goal is to kind of start digging into these issues between working group meetings, craft a set of proposals, and then bring them back to the working group, refine these, and then come up with a draft proposal that can be brought back up to this committee. So again, just to reiterate, nothing is going to be sent to the Cool Council without this committee having an opportunity to review it, provide feedback. They can send it back to the working group if there are specific comments or additional things they want fixed. But again, just really want to emphasize that this group, the goal is to get this group specific proposals for it to review, and then make sure that the group agrees on those things before anything goes up within the charter that we've had for the group. And then the goal being to continue crafting a second set of proposals after this first set to try to have as many things we could consider at full Cool Council in or before November as possible. So that is kind of the brief overview of how we have been thinking about this. Would love any folks' thoughts, perspectives, or opinions on how things are looking.
Don, there's a couple comments in the chat.
Oh, yes.
One is if you could put the slides back up and put on the slide with August, September, and beyond. And then there was a question about engagement of legislators. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
And I'm sorry, I just threw it back up, so now I'm trying to find the chat again. Was the question about, are we engaging? Oh, any legislators, yes.
Yeah.
So we had engaged with our partners at Kentucky's Department of Education, gotten their insights on when the right time might be to bring in legislators. And their general feeling was at this particular point in time, it didn't make sense for this working group to bring in one or more legislators. At some point in the process, I'm sure that those folks will definitely be engaged, especially as policies are crafted. But that was how we resulted in that particular decision.
So I shouldn't be blanking on his name, but who was the legislator who spent the whole time with us at our last gathering? Tipton, thank you.
Yeah.
It's Representative James Tipton. He's current House Education Chair.
Yeah, I mean, he gave us his time for 2 full days, and I asked him about, you know, what his thoughts were in terms of his and other legislators' thinking, and he said it's going to be a long learning process. I don't know. Maybe you're in contact with him. At the very least, you might want to connect with him and tell him, you know, this is what we're doing around policy. And just kind of keep him in the loop, because he did give us his time. That I found that pretty impressive.
That's good thought, Edna.
I
Thanks.
agree with Edna.
Yeah, and if I could jump in here too, and say that I think the thing that's really special about this particular standing committee is that there's a focus on both policy and community engagement work. And I think we want to think about and I don't know the answer, so this is for you guys to decide, but we want to think about, I think, the place that we want to really center that education and engagement with legislators. In the policy working group, at least the way this one is set up, is those individuals are going to be preparing detailed policy language for this committee to review based on the things you are signaling to them to create. So it's not asking a policymaker to bring his or her opinion into that. It is, we are building the language in service of the BNF committee members. And so that may or may not be the right place for a legislature to attend. In the community engagement side, that's where we'll be doing the education, collecting feedback. That may or may not be the place for legislators to be involved. So I think that's maybe a really important question that this committee wants to think about as we think about how we move those two working groups forward alongside the broader committee mission.
And I think just to give an example from how we were thinking about this first meeting is, let's say there needs to be some brainstorming amongst the folks who are there about who's the right actor to address this. If there's a specific issue, for example, one of the buckets that folks that recommended addressing is the, again, planning funding. So the original intent was see if there is existing funding that could be repurposed to provide grants for district teams interested in visiting Kentucky's local laboratories of learning and engaging in learning to study what things look like and how they could learn from them. I think we've heard that desire expressed a lot on this call over the last hour and 20 minutes. If that is something we could do through existing funding, then that's great. But perhaps the recommendation ends up being, we can't actually repurpose funding and there needs to be some kind of a line item from the legislature. I think that would definitely be a scenario where we would say, oh, yes, now we absolutely need to go as a process in developing this proposal and engage with the legislator, like Representative Tipton, since that is going to be such an important part, as I think, Julie, you highlighted, that if someone's going to carry the policy, they have to be engaged in it from the beginning. And I think it's my take on it would be that that's a great instance of cross that bridge when we come to it type of thing. And when it makes sense, absolutely consider who to engage with and how to engage with them.
Hey, John, I've been in conversation with both Chair Tipton and Chairman West, the Senate Ed chairman, and they have an interim joint committee on education meeting cycle that runs, I think, through November. I don't think they have a December date, but I've been talking with them about some of this work and bringing some of those pioneer districts in to share what they're doing around this deeper, more personalized learning space. These are districts that have portraits of learners, and they're doing local community-based accountability systems and other innovative strategies to do exactly what Edna was talking about, operationalize it to impact instruction and learning for students. And they seemed like they were open to that. So I'll keep you posted. But if we have some of our work done and the Cool Council meets in early November, there might even be an opportunity to have a chance to begin talking with legislators about this. That may be too much of a ambitious timeline, but if we want to have any traction during the session, So that may be a beautiful opportunity. I'm just kind of posing that as a possibility. I don't know the November date right off. I'm trying to get that while we're on this meeting, but just FYI.
That's great. Yeah, we'd love to have that date for sure. That sounds like a great idea.
John, can you put up your third slide for me, please?
Apologies, I'm jumping between slide deck and taking notes for the meetings. So I believe, is this the one that you were looking for, Edna?
No, that's not the one.
Uh,
It had 2 columns.
oh, that one.
That one, yep. What could you tell us again what this P20 vision alignment is? Oh, okay, I know what that is. That's from P12 into
Mhm.
college. Okay. So one of the things that I keep thinking in my head is that we're focused here in this policy place around accountability and assessment. And is that because we don't need to do anything in terms of the actual learning experiences? I mean, if you look at the standards, I think most of the standards already are more focused on, I know in math and science, they're focused on more active kind of learning. Why are we, it seems like we're losing the vibrant learning piece in here. I know that we're the policy committee, but should we not also be doing policy around the learning experiences?
Absolutely. And I think, for example, where that comes out here, the funding for planning, I think that in my mind is a very learning experience centered recommendation. It's thinking about how do we get people more exposure to that, the evaluation and improvement, how do we collect the data and what's the impact these learning experiences are having and how do we disseminate that. The way that folks, the local data and impact, just for context, that was folks essentially saying, how do we build the capacity of districts to collect that information for themselves and integrate it into local accountability systems? So, I think but that would just be a couple of initial thoughts on how those pieces would also be integrated in here. But please tell me if I'm not understanding your question correctly.
Edna, are you just wanting to be more explicit in what we're shooting for and
I think so.
somewhere?
I think that when we always, it might be there, John, like you just said, but as Jim says, it's not very explicit there. And it would be easy to forget that what we're really looking at is change in what, how did you put it, Jim, in the chat? If we don't enhance the learning experiences, we're wasting our time, money, and resources. And so somehow, can we make sure that we are thinking about those learning experiences of kids? And again, I think a lot of districts are doing some of this. I just don't know how many of them are. And if we can tie in and say, hey, you're already doing this, it won't feel so ominous to them that we're going to add something to the graduation requirements.
Did you have a particular thought or a suggestion in how we might do that more explicitly here, Edna?
Well, maybe, I mean, where you talk about local data and impact, what is that local data and impact? I mean, maybe it just doesn't show up on the slide. Jim, do you have any thoughts?
I'm thinking, I mean, I see where you're coming from, and I do think we have to keep that central to everything we do.
Yeah, and then I'll be fully transparent. These were on some level in synthesizing the feedback from folks that did the activity in April, kind of my attempts to add a descriptor in front of a much longer, essentially like 4 to 6 sentences in many cases, paragraph of what the specific recommendations were. So on some level, the fault may be with me for not having the best language to describe what's going on. But I think that's a pretty straightforward.
So we
fix.
can do local data impact, on
Local,
rich learning experiences or something.
yeah. Well,
Here, let me.
John, I don't want you to think that I'm just pointing a finger at this right here. I think this has been sort of a piece that the policy has consistently been more around the assessment and accountability. And I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of there are might be other policies that are around learning experiences.
Definitely. And again, just to reflect, these were specifically the policies that the committee tasked this particular working group to dig into. Not to say other ones aren't important, but again, we're just trying to take the direction of the full committee and dig into what they asked us to do.
Yeah, I realize that.
Any other thoughts or questions or feedback from folks? See, Michelle, is that a hand up for this?
Yes, I've been trying to get the information for a while. I know we have been doing the portrait of a learner. The profile is already established, but the Henderson County school system is where I live at. And I just put the information in the link to Build a Better Graduate because I asked them why nobody's participating. And so if you look at the link I provided for the Henderson County school system, this is what they're doing as their own profile of a learner. So I'm just curious how they can incorporate something that we're trying to do that align, because you mentioned competency-based thinking, what was it, work-based, like something I'm just, because I was trying to catch up because I was late. You mentioned that, with me being in higher education, we are trying to tie all this in and not reinvent the wheel, whereas the smooth transition from K through 12, and then, when they go into higher education. So you mentioned that. So it's kind of important to understand what is going on. So I just want to throw that out there to say, hey, this is what our school system is doing. And I talked to the superintendent and he said, well, this is where we're going in this direction.
Hey, Michelle, can you put that back in the chat? I couldn't find it.
The link. Okay, I sure will. Give me a minute.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Dr. Spell, if I can chime in, I think the goal, at least as I've heard the Kentucky Board of Ed articulate, is that any policy move that they are looking to explore is meant to be a build upon of what's already happening in districts across the state. And so I think they do not want, like the state portrait of a learner is not meant to, replace or, over, can't think of the word, sorry. But it's not meant to replace one of the local portraits. And so I think like what Henderson County is doing, I haven't looked at this closely, but I'm assuming that this is exactly the kind of activity that the board was looking to encourage. And so I think as this committee seeks to provide guidance to the board as they look to explore things like, aligning graduation requirements to a portrait of a learner, how do we make sure that we're collecting data from places like, Henderson schools, so we have that information to share back with board members about what the impact might be. So I think these examples are exactly what we want to bring into this work.
And also, with CPE, because they have their portrait of a learner that I'm on the committee that we're currently working on, and so I shared the KDE information that we've been doing So we're kind of not reinventing the wheel, but just aligning everything aligned.
Exactly. That was the comment I wanted to make. We need to make sure that we reach out to EPPs so that as they're training our educator preparation programs, so that as they're training new teachers, they come out of their programs understanding what Portrait of a Learner is. And their first introduction should not be at in-service. There needs to be a connection between pre-service training and in-service professional development as it relates to Portrait of a Learner.
Jim, was you able to see the link? I see somebody else posted.
I did. Yeah, no, it was
All right.
good work, and it's right in alignment with all the stuff we're talking about. So thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yes, great point, Renee. I noticed Lillian had mentioned that in the chat, and just wanted to echo that and say thank you to everyone who has contributed to this conversation in thinking about policy and how we're moving forward and thinking about the goals of the working group that's focused on that and so forth. And before we move on, I do want to say thank you to John for doing a lot of really good work in leading that effort and being very supportive of the group who have real interest as members of that group in policy. And I also want to thank Lillian and then of course all of our supporters at the Department of Education who are helping us as we work to think about moving forward into the future. And so I'll ask if there are any other thoughts to share when it comes to this, and if not, we will move forward along our agenda. All right, I'm not hearing any, and I don't see any hands raised at the moment. So I'll invite Bentley Watt, our vice chair, to help with our next agenda item.
Okay, now here we are. Okay, hello folks. First things first, I would like to apologize for not having been here for the last 2 meetings. My first meeting, I was on a summer vacation sabbatical. I just needed a break. And during the second meeting that I was missing, I was at the Governor Scholars Program at Central College. So now I am back, and here we are. So the next agenda item is just general updates or news to share with the whole group. So if anyone has any great things that have happened or just general updates, now would be the great time to share them.
Well, I'm finally full professor, so I don't have to do no more notebooks. That's what happened.
Congratulations.
That's wonderful.
Congrats, Michelle.
Thank you. If you knew how much stress I went through to make that happen, but it is
Right.
I'm finally full professor.
Wonderful, wonderful. I see that Julie has her hand raised.
Yes.
Yeah, so as Caleb mentioned, I did attend my first State Board of Education meeting. And I just want to say that we have a fabulous State Board of Education. Members, their hearts are in the right places. They're there for the right thing. And we're in very good hands. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
It appears Dr. Flynn has his hand raised.
I think I shared with you all, maybe last time we were together, we had Superintendent Summit in June. And we focused on our policy priorities as an association of school superintendents. But, and those are around three big areas: funding, workforce challenges, and breaking down barriers to unleashed learning. And so anyway, we had some pioneer districts superintendents come in and kind of serve as a panel. And Dr. Randy Poe, who's one of Julie's colleagues on the Executive Board of Education, facilitated that segment on breaking down barriers to unleashed learning. And there's some great conversations around that. And we're going to continue to push that as a policy priority, a set of policy priorities for our efforts. But then we're going to have our fall superintendent summit, September 25th and 26th. And on the 25th, we're inviting all members of the education committees in both chambers and the A&R chairs and vice chairs to come and join us and kind of have some more discussion around these issues and find those traction points. So that might tee us up for like in October or actually our November meeting to have some robust discussions about this. But anyway, I've talked to Chair Tippett and Chair West, as I mentioned, about bringing some of these pioneer districts to share their work and talk about how impactful that is for students and their learning experiences, but also talk about the barriers that get in the way of this work, so we can get some traction to move this forward and really kind of think about what are the low-hanging fruit that we can maybe pick off this next session. It'll probably be a multi-session effort, but we got to get started now. But anyway, we're excited about that.
Julie has her hand raised. Oh, no, Julie does not have her hand raised. So that is the last of our positivity or dose of positivity for the day. Okay, I think we can turn it back over to Caleb now.
Yes, thank you so much, Bentley. We are so glad to have you with us again this evening, but also certainly appreciate the break that you took. I know you're involved with so much, and we appreciate all your efforts. And also, we're very grateful that to learn that you had a wonderful experience with the Governor's Scholars Program, and very excited for all the wonderful things that you're doing, and we're grateful that you're involved with the work of our committee. So thank you for being here this evening for leading that segment, and for allowing us to focus on some positivity there. And certainly we did. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening and for being here and engaging in these conversations and reflecting upon the board meeting and thinking about next steps for our group and how we're going to move forward, thinking about policy. And there was a lot of really great conversation that happened tonight, and I'm excited about that. Look forward to our next meeting. And I do not want to tell you wrong. I want to be sure that I do get that date right. So if I'm not able to find it this evening, actually, I'll ask if any of our, Lillian, do you happen to know when our next meeting is? I'm drawing a blank.
Yes, it's September 5th at our
Great.
normal time of 5 p.m. Eastern.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so September 5th it is. Just wanted to be sure I was correct there before I threw the date out. Okay. And so we'll plan to reconvene then. And of course, as John mentioned, there will be a meeting next week for that subgroup, that working group. Also want to remind everyone to please complete the survey that Susan Strange has listed in the chat for us. It pertains to commitments next year when it comes to the United We Learn Council. And so we'll ask everyone to please submit their responses before the due date of Wednesday. So appreciate your willingness to do that. Without anything else to be said, I want to just wish everyone a great evening, and again thank everyone for being here. And with that said, we will adjourn, and please be on the lookout for an email from me in the near future. So have a great evening, y'all.